So over the next few days I thought I would finish our class story, the letters from the lighthouse, so that when we come back to school we can start a new class book together. So in the story we got to the point where Cliff had been quite poorly. He had appendicitis and he'd been taken to hospital, so Olive sent a telegram to Mum to ask her to come to Budmouth Point so she could be with him while he was so ill. And when she arrived they found out that Mum had actually been the mystery contact in London who was helping the refugees get to where they needed to be. So the next morning Mum went to Plymouth to be with Cliff. She was planning on staying there till he was well enough to come home. Alone again, I had plenty of time to think, though the best medicine for it was to keep busy. At night I read far later than usual, hoping that when I switched off my torch I'd fall asleep more easily. It didn't often work. In the day I delivered food from Ephraim's cupboard to the refugees. On such a morning, a few days after Mum had left, I ran into Esther in the street. She said she was going to school. What, now? Our afternoon session went on long enough. I couldn't imagine anyone choosing to spend a whole day in lessons. Yes, now, Esther said, like I was being really slow. Mr. Barrowman's given a talk to the local kids about the refugees. I thought the plan was to keep things low profile. Too late for that, Esther replied. Actually, I was glad someone was addressing the issue. What had started out as a low-key mission had quickly become the talk of the village. There weren't 32 refugees anymore. Miss Sangari had already gone to catch a ship to New York, and a few of the others had taken trains to London. Yet the word soon got round that 20 or so people remained, which in a place as small as Budmouth Point was bound to stir things up. And it had. Some of the locals had been nice. We'd had offers of clothes and food and spare beds, but plenty had been pretty hostile. We don't want their sort round here, I overheard a woman in the queue at the baker's saying. Her friend agreed. They won't eat our meat, so Mrs. Drummond says, and they've got other funny ways you wouldn't imagine. It even got to the point where some people were calling Miss Carter and Mrs. Henderson names in the street and boycotting Queenie's shop. We'd better hurry then, I said to Esther. We don't want to miss what Mr. Barrowman's got to say. Linking arms, we walked on up the street. I didn't make a big thing of it, but it was for the first time I'd properly felt like her friend. The school sounded hushed, like it did when lessons were in full swing. This way. I beckoned Esther to the side of the building. She looked unimpressed. Aren't we just going in? We haven't been invited, I reminded her. The big window that had broken when the stray bomb fell still hadn't been fixed. If we stood right underneath it, we'd hear what was going on inside. Almost straight away, I recognised Mr. Barrowman's voice with its London accent. Refugees are people who had to flee for their lives. They're leaving their jobs, homes, families because of war. We should be welcoming them, not treating them like enemies. The class grumbled disagreeably. Esther looked worried. Oh dear, he's laying it on a bit thick, isn't he? He's trying to help, I pointed out, thinking perhaps he was quite decent for a teacher after all. But he's stirring things up, not calming them down. My father and the others just need a few days to recover and they'll be on their way again. Are you leaving as well? I wasn't sure I liked the idea. Can't you all stay here in England? Esther shrugged. I don't know. The laws on Asylum are so strict now. My father's and the others are pretty sure they won't get accepted that way. They've got identity papers, fake ones, with English names and occupations, just to get them to the nearest port and onto another boat. It's all very risky. The risk lay with Queenie too, then. She'd probably go to prison if she got caught forging papers. This bothered me as well. Inside, Mr. Barrowman was still talking. What the Nazis are doing is terrifying, all because being Jewish doesn't fit with their ideals. My mum says them new people are Germans, a boy interrupted, and you expect us to look after them? They're from Austria, Mr. Barrowman corrected him calmly, a country invaded by Hitler. Why should we help the Jews? Said someone else. What have they ever done for us? As the class went quiet, Mr. Barrowman tried again. Put it another way, how would you feel if your life was at risk just because you were from Devon? He can't help that, sir. He was born here, someone quipped. The group erupted into laughter. That's my point exactly. Would you stay here and die, or would you leave? The boy didn't respond. How would you feel about being spat at in the street, or seeing your parents arrested though they'd done nothing wrong? I glanced nervously at Esther. Her face was tight with emotion. Perhaps listening in hadn't been such a great idea. This is why we're at war with Hitler. We don't hate the German people, we hate fascism. Wouldn't it be a way of letting Hitler win if we all started behaving as he does? It made perfect sense to me. I was expecting the class to think so too, but what followed was an uncomfortable silence. A few coughs. Someone muttered about his ruler being taken. Another boy said he didn't have it. Yes, you have, Clutterbuck. I saw you nick it. Go chase yourself, the boy snarled. The class's usual teacher, Mrs. Simmons, clapped for quiet. It was too late. By then, Mr. Barrowman's moment was lost. Esther didn't stay to hear any more. I went after her and found her sitting on the school wall, angry tears in her eyes. I came to England to try to forget what happened. Esther wiped her face clumsily with her coat sleeve. But I can't escape it. Seeing Papa again, it's brought it all back to me. Here. Giving her my rather grubby hanky, I hopped up to sit beside her. She took it and blew her nose. I know Mr. Barrowman means well, and I'm grateful, but, she paused, it's my story, you know. I should be the one telling it. We sat staring out over the village to the grey-green sea and the lighthouse painted dull as a chimney pot. You can tell me if you like, I said quietly. I honestly didn't expect her to, and she didn't say anything for such a long time. When she did speak, it surprised me. I can't remember a specific time when the comments and the name-calling started, but one evening in November it all got much worse, she said. My brother Tobias and me were doing our homework at the dining-room table, like we always did. You've got a brother? She hesitated before nodding. Papa was working late at the clinic in a friend's back room. It was against the law for Jews to work as doctors. Mamma was making supper in the kitchen, and I remember her cursing because she just burnt her hand on the griddle. Tobias and me couldn't stop laughing because Mamma never swore. The memory of it made her mouth twitch in an almost smile. Then someone banged on our front door. It was too late for a social calling. Mamma told us not to answer it. Everyone knew someone who'd had a knock at the door like that. Who was it? The police, usually. Sometimes Hitler's soldiers. It was never for a good reason, and it never ended happily. We all dreaded it happening to us, so Mamma turned the lights out and put her hand over the dog's nose. Esther, glancing sideways at me, explained. We had a sausage dog called Goethe who barked at everything. The knocking went on, and they started shouting through the letterbox, saying they'd burn the house down if we didn't answer the door. Mamma told us to hide under the table and went to speak to them. They wanted Papa. They said he'd been treating non-Jewish patients at the clinic and it had to stop. Mamma told them he wasn't here, but they didn't believe her and came in anyway. There were 4 of them in Nazi uniform, stomping through our house in their filthy great boots. Finding us hiding under the table, they decided to take Tobias as a substitute for Papa. When your husband hands himself in, we'll release the boy, was what they said. It was cold outside, a freezing Austrian winter's night, but they wouldn't let Tobias fetch his coat. As soon as they laid hands on him, Mamma started screaming. She let go of Goethe and grabbed Tobias, we both did, pulling on his arms, yelling that they couldn't take him, that he'd done nothing wrong. Goethe was barking. I saw one of the men swing his boot at her. She went flying across the room, hitting the mantelpiece. It was awful. She didn't bark after that. It took a moment for the horror of what she was saying to sink in. Don't tell me any more if you don't want to, I said gently. She stared straight ahead like she hadn't heard me. They took my brother away. He was 10 years old. We ran into the street after them, and it was chaos, like the end of the world or something. The whole town was full of Nazi uniforms. There were broken windows, burning houses, people sobbing in the gutter. The synagogue at the end of our street was on fire. I was terrified, so terrified I couldn't move. But Mum kept running, shouting and yelling and running after my brother. I didn't see what happened, but I heard the gunshot. She stopped, rubbed her face in her hands. Afterwards they gave it a very pretty name, Kristallnacht, meaning the night of broken glass. But it was the night I lost my mother and my brother. I was sent away soon after as part of the Kindertransport, though Papa never got used to losing us all at once, and nor did I. That's why he came to find me. He always promised he'd try. Anything I might have said stayed stuck in my throat. There weren't words for it, not really. So I put my arm through Esther's, and we sat gazing out to sea. 2 old enemies who were at last friends. She was right. It was her story to tell, and I could think of plenty who might benefit from hearing it.